All right, we are live. Sonny, I'm very, very excited to have you here today. Thank you very much for showing up on the podcast. For those of you who do not know, Sonny works with the USDA, the National Institute, the sub category or office, National Institute of
Food and Agriculture.
I knew it was
it's
something.
Called an agency.
Agency, exactly. Yeah, I'm tripping on my words here.
No worries, Ryan. Yeah.
So let's just get right into it. So you were actually here this afternoon at the Kansas City Library doing sharing a lot of information and a conversation about the monarch butterflies, what their life cycle, how unique they are, and how they're going, their migrations from Canada, United States down to Mexico. So let's just dig right in, just like jump right on in. First, what got you interested in butterflies of all things as a career and a focus?
Sure. Hey, thanks so much, Ryan, for having me on your podcast, and really excited about this. And so I'm just a little bit of my agency, so people know about it as well. So my name is Sonny Ramaswamy. I'm the director of the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, which is one of the agencies, many agencies. There was about 18 agencies within the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And my agency is vested with the responsibility to support the science that we need in addressing what we refer to as nutritional security. It's about food. It's about agriculture and things of that nature. And that's what my agency is all about. And the person in my position, I'm the director of it. I'm a presidential appointee, unlike all the other agencies within the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Right. You got appointed in the last term by President Obama.
I did. And so we, just a tad bit again about the agency itself, we're the funding agency. And the approach that we've got with our agency is that it's not just about science for the sake of science, knowledge for the sake of knowledge. Our expectation is that the science is going to be put to work.
Okay.
And you translate that knowledge that's being generated through research into innovations and solutions, and then you deliver it to the end users, whether they're farmers or children. For example, we also manage the 4-H program. Many of your listeners probably know about 4-H.
Missouri, of course.
Of course. And we have 6 million children in America in 4-H. We manage all of those. And the knowledge is delivered to the end users, and then it transforms people's lives, whether it is farmers, it is the average person on the street. I believe that through USDA, broadly writ, we have an impact on every man, woman, and child in America, because food, at the end of the day, as you know, is fundamental to our very existence.
Of course.
And so we provide funding to generate knowledge. It's not just about row crop agriculture or livestock agriculture, like producing beef cattle or dairy cattle or chickens or turkeys or whatever. But really, there are a whole bunch of constraints against our ability to produce food. What I refer to as non-living constraints or abiotic constraints. This would be everything from climate change to the droughts that we're seeing,
or the hurricane right now down in
Texas.
Texas.
Exactly, Harvey and things like that too, along with issues related to regulations and policies and labor and things like that. All of that are what I refer to as the abiotic, non-living constraints that farmers are facing, our ability to produce food. And then we got a whole slew of biological constraints as well. And everything from insects and pathogens that are pests, to weeds, to issues related to genetics and gene editing and GMOs and things like that too. So it's a pretty broad portfolio. And then when we're thinking of constraints, we have to think also of particularly our row crops and our fruit and vegetable crops. They need pollinators. You got to have pollinators to be able to pollinate those crops. And as soon as they pollinator, probably for your listeners, the first thing that pops into their minds is honeybees.
Sure.
Honeybees are obviously a very significant part, and many of your listeners have also heard about the challenges we have with honeybees. Many of them are dying. We refer to it as colony collapse disorder. There's a whole bunch of factors that go into why the honeybees are dying. And again, we provide a good bit of funding to try to help understand what those factors are.
What's this current state, just real quick, of the honeybee? Because you always see a lot of conflicting news. I know maybe 6 months ago or so, a huge somebody accidentally dropped a lot of air pesticides on like the wrong area and killed like 30,000 colonies of bees in the southeast.
Sure.
What's the current state of the bee colony out there right now?
Sure. So, those things happen from time to time. Mistakes are made by people that are applying insecticides or pesticides in general. And so the National Agricultural Statistics Survey, which is one of the USDA agencies that keeps track of honeybee colonies, of our crops, the number of acres of crops, the number of head of cattle, and things like that. And in the latest surveys, they tell us that the honeybee populations, they were going down quite a bit.
Okay.
And I hope it is the case that it's bottoming out and indeed slightly headed in the right direction, heading north. And we hope that continues to happen as well. If you look at the amount of honey that's produced, the number of honeybee colonies and things like that, all of this are headed in the right direction right now. Okay. So pollinators are really important, and honeybees are one part of it. There's also a whole bunch of native, other insect species. You've got everything from other native bees, bumblebees. Many of your listeners also know about bumblebees. There's a whole slew of bees we refer to as solitary bees. And all of these are basically part of this overall ecosystem of pollinators, along with butterflies. Also, bats, by the way, are excellent pollinators. So are birds.
Okay.
And and moths. A moth is basically a night-flying butterfly, or a butterfly is a day-flying moth, as the case might be. Okay, so there are a whole bunch of moths and butterflies and other honeybees. Beetles, for example, there's a whole slew of beetles that are also excellent pollinators as well. So when we think of pollinators, it's really a large number of them.
Okay.
Now, when you narrow it down to the world of butterflies, when I say a butterfly, the classic example for the average person on the street, the mental image that they may have, is one of a monarch butterfly. And the monarch butterflies are an amazing creature. And so your question really, when you started, was how did I get into it?
Yeah.
I am an entomologist by training. I have a PhD in entomology. I've been a student of insects and one who has undertaken research and one who has also taught entomology. I've been, in multiple different institutions across America, and I was at Kansas State University in Manhattan, Kansas, just a couple hours west of Kansas City, and at other institutions as well. And in fact, your listeners might be interested. I built a butterfly conservatory and an insect zoo in Manhattan, Kansas, right in the middle of the prairie.
Wow.
And it's a fantastic facility. And your listeners might want to go to the Kansas State University location in Manhattan. There's a beautiful garden, the KSU Gardens, and there's an old limestone building, the old dairy barn, in which we built the insect zoo several years ago.
Okay.
And so I've been a student of insects for a long time, and part of my research has been in two areas. One is how do males and females find each other so they can copulate and reproduce.
Okay.
That's one part of it. What are the signals they might use? Many insects will use chemical signals to communicate their readiness, sexual readiness for that matter, right? They'll reproduce. In addition, some insects might end up using sound and things like that as well. Other insects end up using visual cues. They can actually see. So many of the butterfly species end up using visually. They'll determine whether the male or the female is ready to go through the reproductive process or not. So that's one aspect of the work that we did. We identified the signals, we identified the cues, we identified how they find each other. We worked particularly on night flying moths wearing night vision goggles like we see today.
Wow.
Wearing night vision goggles in the middle of the night at 2 a.m. in cotton fields, we would chase these moths and
that's dedication.
Track them. Yeah, of course. Yeah. That's when they're active, so you got to be active at that time.
Right.
And then we also were interested in how does the adult female, once she has been mated, and she'll now start producing eggs, and she has to find the plant on which her larvae will have the most ability to develop and grow successfully into an adult stage, right? And I like to say mother knows best, because it's the female butterfly or the moth, or the case might be, or any insect for that matter, will go using, again, various types of cues. the plant architecture, the color of it, the shape of it, whether the plant's growing sideways or erect, the smell of it, etc. All of this is taken into account, and the female will find it. Go ahead. You're gonna
So the female finds it. That's something that I've always wondered. So, for example, in my parents' backyard, I've got a tall, just a good old southern milkweed plant, right? Very common for monarchs, but it's not like it's in a field where there's a lot of supporting wildlife or nature or anything. It's in suburbia. So, a butterfly, and clearly a butterfly can travel a few miles a day.
Yep.
It can get very high, thousands of feet up. How does it every single summer that one milkweed plant gets eggs laid on it?
Yeah.
What is it that the monarchs or the butterflies in general see that they can point out and pick out this one milkweed plant in the middle of suburbia?
Indeed, it's a pretty phenomenal ability that they've got, and they use, as I said, first of all, is the plant growing erect? So they're using visual cues. So if you take a milkweed plant literally and put it on its side, the butterfly will not go to it.
Okay.
You put a plant that's erect as it grows in your backyard, it will go to the erect plant, but not the plant that's sideways. Okay. So they're using visual cues. It's got to have the right color, the right reflectance of the sunlight. That has to, the right kind of wavelength, etc., that needs to hit the eyes that the insect has, the butterfly has. First, number one, if it's erect, says, it's like a yes, no, yes, no, yes, no type of an approach. Once that's done, the butterfly comes closer and closer, and milkweed plants have a sort of a waxy covering on the leaves, and that changes the reflectance patterns, by the way. Compared with a bright green leaf of a neighboring plant, this milkweed plant has a certain leaf shape, has a certain flower color, and things like that. All of those are, part of the suite of visual characteristics.
So the butterfly's eyes are developed in a way to identify.
Exactly. First.
Okay.
Second, there's the smell of that particular plant that you and I may not be able to smell, but you can. You can take a milkweed plant and crush its leaves and just kind of wave it in front of your fingers in front of your nose, and you'll get a very characteristic smell that's different from the smell of other plants.
Okay.
That's the second part of it. So they're olfactory receptors on the antennae that the insect is finding. And then, if everything's a go, right, then she'll go ahead and land. And as she lands on her feet, she's got 3 pairs of legs on her feet. We refer to them as tarsi, as you know.
Okay.
And on those tarsi, you've got receptors, taste receptors. She's tasting with her feet, and she goes and lands. And again, in that surface chemistry of the leaf, you got all manner of a suite of chemicals in there. And the butterfly now determines, okay, this is indeed a milkweed plant. You can actually do an experiment at home, for example. You can take some, let's say, coffee filter, right? White coffee filter, and take the milkweed leaf, crush it, and put it on that coffee filter. Take another coffee filter on the edge and crush another leaf, unrelated, not a milkweed plant. Just like, regular crushing, put it on there and let it, just air dry it a tad bit. And if you have access to these monarch butterflies, release them in a cage, for example, and the monarch butterfly will go to the one that's got those milkweed crushed, juices on it. Okay. The chemistry. Okay. Once that's done, and then this is the best part. And she's also putting her what we refer to as the proboscis, Proboscis. This is the tongue. Is like a straw-type tongue that's built to suck nectar. But even the tip of that has beautiful taste receptors, and she'll tap, 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 tap. And as she's doing that, and as she's walking on that, she's abrading the skin of that leaf and releasing the additional chemicals. It's almost like, if you were to come across a sage plant or a thyme plant, you might rub your fingers on it and you get the aroma, right? Just that very mild abrasion. That in and of itself gives the butterfly the sense of what that is. Once that's all at go, 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 at any time there may be a negative stimulus, she'll get up and fly away. Okay?
Okay.
If it's go, 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 then finally she'll extend her abdomen. She's sitting on the edge of the leaf. She's sitting, and then she is extending her abdomen and curling the abdomen tip up underneath the leaf. And then she's got what's referred to as the ovipositor. This is the egg-laying tube. And on the tip of that ovipositor, again, she's got receptors, taste receptors. and she wants to make a final confirmation that indeed this is the right spot for my babies to be deposited. And if the confirmation is yes, then she'll go ahead and deposit a single egg. And so if the female will deposit anywhere from 100 to about 300 eggs or so in her that bout. And then she can go ahead, finish that, and then she'll mate again and then start the process over again. So that's how that female's finding that one little plant in your backyard.
Yeah, wow. And here we are worried about like bills and the economy and all this, and you've got butterflies that don't care any, just like they have this one thing that that's their focus. It's their life.
But there are challenges as well.
Yeah.
Just like you and I, if we don't find a place immediately, get a cup of water or food or whatever, we're going to go crazy, frantic, right? And what's happening is because the loss of the plants and loss of habitat, you got fewer and fewer plants. Imagine now the female has to fly a lot farther distances. The more you fly, the fewer the eggs you're going to lay.
Makes sense.
So there's a sort of a trade-off. If you have to fly way too much, you may not lay 300 eggs. You may only lay 5 or 10 eggs.
Okay.
And so that's a huge part of one of the challenges we've got in regards to the populations of these insects as well. And maybe you'll ask me some questions about populations of these insects.
Yeah, actually, you say habitat destruction and the situation. And I ask again, what's the current situation? Because, for the last 5, 10, 15 years, there are websites you send $2 just for shipping, and they'll send you 500 seeds of milkweed to help grow the population of butterflies. But I am absolutely certain it might have been on CNN's website. It was one of the news websites that said, people, stop planting milkweed. You're confusing the butterflies. You're ruining their habitat by overplanting now. And it's like, we can't win for losing here. We're like, what direction do we go? Do you know what I'm referring to? That was only maybe this past spring that I read that article, and I was thinking, this is so contrary, because for the last 5 or 10 years or however long it's been a huge push to increase the habitat, plant more. And then this article says some professionals in the industry are saying, well, now you're confusing them because you're planting them in non-native parts of the North America, and maybe they fly only up to Texas and they stop, and then they go back down to Mexico instead of all the way up to Canada. So what is the situation of as far as habitat destruction by itself, and then we as humans, are we helping or hurting by trying to help?
Sure. I'll come back to the habitat destruction in just a second.
Okay.
But talk a little bit about what we're doing, whether we're helping or hurting. Right?
Okay.
Well, first of all, many humans are well-intentioned. And in that intention, they, will get on today on the internet or whatever, and then purchase some seed and, milkweed seed. And it's okay to go ahead and plant those milkweed seed, except that oftentimes you may have the wrong species. You may be planting the wrong species in the wrong place. That's one thing to remember. The second thing is that they may also have some contaminant seeds in there. There are some contaminant weed seeds that come in with these, wildflower plants for nectar purposes and things like that. That, for example, some cereal companies have been in their boxes. They put a packet of seeds for the pollinators, nectaring plants and all that. Well, it turns out some of these things end up containing noxious weed seed. For example, Palmer amaranth is one of the most noxious weeds that we've got. Farmers are hard-pressed to have to deal with it. And so you want to be very careful that you're going to purchase. You're well-intentioned. There's always unintended consequences, okay? So be very careful and get these seed that you're going to get from reputable places. One place that you might want to, your listeners might want to go to is, for example, monarchwatch.org. One word, monarchwatch.org. And, I always remind people, if you see a .org or a .edu or a .gov, they're not trying to sell you a bill of goods, as they say.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
And Monarch Watch has been around for a very long time. It's managed out of the University of Kansas in Lawrence, Kansas. And Chip Taylor, one of my friends and colleagues, is world-renowned in his work on monarch butterflies. They have all manner of information available. Another website is Journey North. Is also an excellent website, a resource, for example, that people can go. And in fact, like Monarch Watch, if you go there on the website, on the left-hand side of your computer or handheld device or whatever, you'll see milkweed seed. and you click on it, and you can order it. And the really cool thing is not only are you getting the seed, but also you've got an opportunity to provide some small, few pennies of every packet that they sell you go to Monarch Watch or Journey North or whatever. So
just to be clear, the bottom of a cereal box is not a reputable source.
Well, I shouldn't say that, but what happened was when well-intentioned, when they started doing it, we discovered that there were some noxious weeds in there.
Okay.
Another place that people can go to is, for example, the United States government's Fisheries and Wildlife, USFS, United States Fisheries Service, and Forest Service, U.S. Forest Service, USFS.gov, or NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service.
Okay.
They're all federal government agencies. They all provide you links to reputable sources of seed and things like that. And Monarch Watch and Journey North are really easy to remember. Monarch Watch is very, very easy to remember. Journey North is really about the butterflies heading north. Okay, that's about the seed. And you're well-intentioned, that's fantastic, but be very mindful. One thing that your listeners can do as well is to plant what we refer to as butterfly-friendly plants, right? The adult, as she's flying around, long distance or even in your backyard, the more she flies, the less energy she has to make eggs and to deposit eggs. So if you provided nectaring plants, right, flowers that have nectar in them, there's a whole bunch of species. In fact, go back to monarchwatch.org or nrcs.usda.gov or other places. You'll get all manner of information about the appropriate hosts for nectar purposes.
And I got to tell you there, a few summers ago, I was planting some plants, and I was dumb. I bought them off a website, and I bought probably 7 or 8 different nectar and host plants, and I wasn't thinking, and I poured them all into one bag, and then I immediately did not know what any of the seeds were. So I just planted them in a starter kit, 72 little holes, and whatever grew. And after the summer was over, I had one that was just dominating, so I put it out there. It turns out it was a Mexican sunflower plant. I was blown away at how many. I counted one day 6 monarch butterflies on this plant, and I would walk right up to them, and they loved it so much they wouldn't fly away. That thing was just over the. You could see. Magnet. Yeah, it was a magnet. You could see yellow pollen all over them. They were just going crazy, loving that.
Indeed.
So
absolutely. And my wife, she's also been a professor and all that. Gita Ramaswamy. She is a great fan of wildflower seed and things like that, and also the in quotes the ornamental types as well, like zinnias and things like that. Those Mexican hats, the Mexican sunflower that you're referring to, etc. These are fantastic. You get packets of seed, and my wife will in our backyard just sprinkle them around, and they come in, catch can, I guess, and whatever comes up, and they provide a wonderful resource as well. So that's about the seed and things like that.
Okay.
All right, but nectaring is very, very important, right? For adult nectar is really important. It's an energy source for flying. It's also a source of energy for making eggs and things like that too. All right, aside from that, habitat destruction. So what has happened is, now the butterflies, the mother, she basically needs to deposit her eggs on milkweed plants. We already talked about that. That is the sole group of plants. Milkweed plants are the only one. Asclepias, Asclepias, is the group of plants, milkweed plants that she'll use. And people will see, if you drive along Interstate 70 or Interstate 80 or whatever, go from Kansas City going west to Manhattan to Lawrence, Kansas, you'll see Asclepias growing. Like if you go in the prairie, the Flint Hills area of Manhattan, Kansas, up to Salina, you'll see these beautiful milkweed plants with gorgeous flowers and things like that are growing in there, along with a whole slew of other species. Now, that's the only plant that milkweeds are the only plant that can support growth and development of the caterpillars. But the adult can feed on a whole slew of nectaring plants, no problem at all. All right, but the caterpillars need to have that plant. In part, it's got the appropriate nutrients in there. Also, it contains what we refer to as cardenolides, Cardenolides. This is a bitter, sugar-containing compound. Imagine it's got sweet and bitterness to it.
Okay.
And it's pretty poisonous. The milk in the milkweed, when you break open a leaf or whatever, that milk that we refer to as latex, L-E-T-E-X, If you were to ever taste it, and I do all that all the time, put a little, touch and put it in tongue, and spit it out. It's intensely bitter.
Okay.
The caterpillars will take that and incorporate it into their body, and the orange color that you see in the adult butterfly is the result of the deposition. We call it sequestration, putting it away in a spot, right? Deposition of that in the wings, and on the caterpillar itself, you'll see it as well. The orange coloration that you see is a result of the carotenoids. We call them cardiac glycosides. Cardiac, the word, is heart. Glycoside is sugar. So it's got something to do with the heart. And in fact, if you were to take that compound, ingest it, and you are prevented from spitting it out or vomiting, you could have cardiac arrest if you take enough of it.
Wow. Okay.
Because birds, if they take enough of it, will have this. The insect itself is not affected by it because it's sequestering, putting it away.
Mm-hmm.
But birds that feed on these caterpillars, birds that feed on these butterflies and things like that, they very quickly associate the color with the fact that it's bitter. And the good thing about a lot of poisonous substances, as you might know, your listeners might know, they're also potent emetics, E-M-E-T-I-C-S. That is, they make you vomit.
Okay.
You start retching. And birds will go through this retching and they vomit. Okay? And they associate the vomiting and feeling sick with the coloration of the butterfly, and very quickly they learn that they should not be catching those butterflies.
Now, what about butterflies like, say, a swallowtail, which doesn't necessarily have orange wings, or any variety of butterfly? Is this something that's exclusive to the monarch with the orange?
It is exclusive to the monarch because of the milkweed plant.
Okay, all right,
Right?
okay.
Totally exclusive to it, and so it derives benefits from it. And of course, we've got this pretty cool, there's another butterfly called the viceroy, and the viceroy mimics the monarch butterfly. Birds have monocular vision. That is, they have their eyes on the sides, okay? Mm-hmm. And really, they got to look at one eye or the other eye. And I'm sure you've seen birds doing that, And they don't have the depth of vision like you and I, because we have binocular vision. We can have a sense of depth of optical depth of vision, right?
Sure.
And so the viceroys that look a lot, from a distance, a lot like a monarch, because they're mimics, they get protected from not being eaten up because the bird is associating the poisonous nature, the getting sick nature of the monarch butterfly itself. Whereas you and I, with binocular vision, if we look closely, we can see it. And this evening, the 31st of August, as you know, Ryan, I'm doing a lecture at the Kansas City Public Library on this topic as well. I have a lot of pictures and things like that at that time. And so in any case, so that's about the host and things like that. So that's for the larvae, the caterpillars, and for the butterflies. We talked about the nectaring and all that. Now, in the wintertime, the butterflies will migrate all the way down to Mexico in a state called Michoacan, which is in the central part of Mexico. There are these highlands that you get. The elevation there is 10, 13, 14, 15,000 feet. Pretty high elevation.
Yeah.
On those highlands, you've got a particular tree called the Oyamel tree, fir tree. Oyamel, O-Y-A-M-E-L. Oyamel fir tree occurs in that area. And the butterflies that have migrated from Canada, like right about now, they're migrating. We see the butterflies, coming, and you may have seen them in your backyard maybe, or out in the yard or whatever, out in a park or whatever. I was talking to my daughter this morning. As a matter of fact, she was getting ready to go to work. She works at the KU Medical School, Sonny Ramaswamy, and she was telling me in her backyard, they've got a beautiful butterfly-friendly backyard she and her husband Andrew have planted, and she saw monarch butterflies just this morning, she was telling me. So butterflies are now migrating back to Michoacan in Mexico. And they go there, and these trees grow up to about 150 feet tall. And the butterflies will go, it's amazing that they go to this one spot.
Every year, right?
Every year.
Yeah.
And they go, and in the morning, at night, they will roost on the south side of the trees. Remember, from the north, you get these cold winds coming in the wintertime. Okay. So they're on the south side, okay? That is facing South America, in quotes, all right? And that's where they're roosting for the night. And in the morning, they'll get up at about 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock or whatever. Imagine millions of butterflies starting from up in the elevations, flying down into the valley to get a drink of water because they dry out otherwise. And then by about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they'll start flying back up again. In fact, I was in Mexico, Michoacan, back in 2005. I stretched out on my back, and the sky became dark with the hundreds of millions of butterflies flying all en masse, all at once, going down to get some water. So that habitat, unfortunately, so the people that in Michoacan, it's a pretty poor area. That area, it's a place called Zitácuaro and Angangueo and Ocampo and places like that, and it's pretty poor, and they live subsistence living. They barely can farm and things like that. And they cut down the trees, for example, for firewood. Okay, that's also habitat destruction. So here in the United States, for example, and in Canada, if you look at the flyway, which is really from Michoacan through Texas, and then it kind of expands out like a funnel, and then funnels back up into Canada itself, east of the Mississippi, and it goes through Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, and again, if you go to monarchwatch.org, you'll see the map out there.
Maybe kind of like that.
There you go. You got that map right there, and there you go. So it's a sort of an inverted funnel, or it's a funnel, and then it becomes an inverted funnel as well up on top.
Okay.
And so along the flyway, as we refer to it, we have a lot of because of the building up of highways and strip malls and shopping centers and housing subdivisions. And just look at, if you ever get a chance to look at the map of America, like satellite maps of America, over the last about 40 years or so, and you'll see the increasing expansion of homes and subdivisions and roads and interstate system and highways and on and on. That's part of the habitat destruction as well.
Sure.
So that's contributing to habitat. The third thing is, farming. We obviously need food as well, and so we grow a lot of our food in America, for example, comes from in the area of the flyway itself. The granary basket of America really is in the flyway of the monarch butterfly. And so what's happened is because of farming and there's loss of habitat there as well. Although the United States Department of Agriculture with what's referred, NRCS, the National Resource Conservation Service, they're providing all manner of resources and incentives, for example, for farmers to set aside land fallow. For example, CRP, we refer to it as CRP, Conservation Reserve Program.
Right.
So you don't touch it, you let it set it aside. That's another way to make sure that the habitat is not going to be completely destroyed. NRCS has really come through a very significant level of that kind of work. In fact, during the Obama administration, President Obama here a couple of years ago released the National Pollinator Blueprint, and because of that, all the federal agencies, including my agency, NIFA, the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, NRCS, the National Resource Conservation Service, Forest Service within USDA, and also Fisheries and Wildlife, and Department of Interior, Environmental Protection Agency, etc., have all come together to work together to make sure that we're going to protect the habitats. But what's happened is some of that habitat's become fractionated, subdivided, and because of use of herbicides, for example, the loss of the milkweed plants themselves. So there's a whole bunch of things that are, when we think of habitat destruction, loss, it's not just the fact that it's happening in any one person's backyard or in Michoacan with the tall trees, and all these things are happening. And so what's happening is those trees are getting thinned out, for example. The thinning out is contributing to the butterflies not being protected from these northern cold winds. And now with climate change and things like that, we're also seeing very intense cold rainfall events and things like that. Very intense.
And that's kind of developed over the last few years.
Yeah, over the last few years.
Or decades
things,
even.
Yeah, right. These things have been, slowly developing. And so when you look at the overall challenges that we've got, there's many, many challenges. But I can tell you that the United States government is deeply, deeply involved in making. In fact, if you go to NRCS, if you Googled very simply monarch butterflies and NRCS, you'll come to a website where it shows you a map of the United States, the flyway in all these different states, and what the NRCS is doing or the Forest Service is doing, et cetera. And really, as we say in USDA, our farmers have a significant role to play. And farmers are the number one original environmentalists, right? A lot of times in a lot of places, people will start, saying, oh my gosh, these farmers are doing these things. It's totally untrue. In fact, I ask people, I remind them, did you get up this morning and eat some breakfast? Or are you going to go eat some lunch or eat some dinner or whatever? Without farming, we wouldn't have any of that. And farmers also want to make sure that their children, their families are protected as well. So they're the first environmentalists. And so what the U.S. government, USDA very specifically, is doing is really to make sure that these habitats that we've learned a lot over the last few years. We know that we've lost the habitat. We know the population numbers have gone down owing to various reasons. And now we're trying to, come up with a path forward on improving.
Well, let's say for argument's sake, like a lot of agencies are involved there in the U.S. government too, like you said, protect and work with farmers and such. Some people would say, big deal, Mother Nature, let Mother Nature figure it out. What happens if next year no butterflies are around? Just for argument's sake, next year there are no butterflies. How's it going to affect the ecosystem in the world that we live in?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not just this butterfly is the poster child, for example, right? So the loss of one species of butterflies in and of itself is not the devastating part of it, but it is the poster child. It is an indicator that there are other things that are going on in the environment that you and I collectively have to be very mindful of. And so we've got to do everything we can to protect. And that's what the U.S. government is doing, is really we got to be mindful of this, make sure that all the different species, there's a suite of, as I said earlier when we got started, there's a whole bunch of species of insects and birds and bats and things like that that are necessary, right? So focusing on the one monarch butterfly as the poster child in and of itself is not enough. We got to think of the broader aspects of it as well. And so yeah, it is a poster child, and yeah, if it's lost, yeah, it'll have an impact on us. But it's not a make or break. Okay. Right? But really, we want to take that poster child and figure out why it's going down so that we can address it, so that the rest of the suite of species are also protected.
How did the monarch butterfly become the poster child of butterflies? Because I think you ask any person in America, name your first butterfly that comes to mind, it's always the monarch. Even from grade school, I remember it's been like, save the monarchs. Was there something inherently unique about the monarchs, or was that just somewhere along the path that it said, hey, let's make the monarch the poster child, as you said? How did that? Do you know how that came to be? It's the butterfly.
Yeah, there was not an intentional. Okay, we're going to set out to create a poster child that was developed. In fact, this evening's lecture, the title of my lecture is "The Miracle That Is the Monarch." It is an amazing insect, right? So the insect will go from Mexico in the springtime, late winter, early spring, fly up to Texas, and deposit eggs. The eggs will develop. An adult, a whole bunch of adults come out, and they fly north, maybe go into Kansas, Oklahoma. They reproduce there by about the month of June or so. Then they go up further north into Iowa, Minnesota, etc., Michigan, and then up into Ontario, Canada itself, right? And then right about now, towards the late summer, they turn around. So they can't go any farther, I should say, beyond this sort of an invisible line in Canada where the larval host, milkweed plants, do not grow. There's an invisible line, if you can visualize it, that runs almost where the border between the United States and Canada is, beyond which milkweeds will not grow. Okay, so it cannot expand beyond that. It only stops right there, Lake Ontario, environs in Ontario, Canada. And then, and the population builds up, and then they go to Canada, and then right about this time, they turn around and start heading back south again. Some of them will make the entire trek, almost 3,000 miles, back to Michoacan. Some of them do, right? Some of them will reproduce, like in Kansas right now, or in Missouri. They're reproducing, and that next batch, the next generation will, go further south itself. So The individual that started in the late winter, early spring from Michoacan in Mexico, and the individual that's going to head back from Ontario, they're about 4 to 5 generations removed. It's the great-great-great-grandchild.
All in one summer.
All in one summer. We have a lot of animals that migrate.
Yeah.
Humans migrate, right? We call them snowbirds, right? From New York City, they go to Florida or to Arizona or whatever in the wintertime. Wildebeest will migrate. Whales will migrate. Bacteria migrate. And birds migrate. The classic example, again, is the Canada geese that migrate back and forth.
Yeah.
But it's the same individual that migrates back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
Monarch butterflies are amazing that it's not the same individual that migrates back and forth. That's the miracle about this. Got a brain, and it goes back to the same spot in Michoacan. How's that doing it?
Yeah.
And how do the butterflies know they're going south?
Right.
Okay? Or north. They use what I refer to as celestial compasses. That's the sun and the moon and the stars, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And where the sun rises. And they have like a magnetic compass in their brains. And all of this is pulled together, and the insect is able to make that trek. That's number one. It's that miracle of that multiple generations removed individual. The second thing is children in the flyway, particularly in the midsection of the United States, see these butterflies coming through. And they never, think of it, but they see these beautiful butterflies. It's gorgeous colors, black and white and orange and things like that. And they're really intrigued by these butterflies. And the parents will say, oh, there goes a monarch butterfly or something like that, And so that visual image that's created in our children and as we grow and all that, that's what, if I said butterfly, they think of a monarch butterfly. So that's the sort of the situation that you've got. And the people that figure this out, it's a fascinating story. People in Michoacan, every late fall, winter, they saw the butterflies. And they're called mariposas monarca in Spanish. Mm-hmm. And they always thought that they were the spirits of God that were their ancestors, etc., coming back every wintertime to protect them. And then they disappear, and they didn't know where they were going. And then conversely, in America, in the midsection of America, people will see these butterflies. Okay, I see it in June or something. Then again, I see it in August, September. What's up with this? Right? Don't know where they're going. Are they hanging around here or what? Right? And then in Canada, they see the butterflies late summer, and then they disappear. For millennia, people have been seeing this, not knowing what was happening. And then you've got this amazing couple, Fred and Nora Urquhart. And Fred was a biologist, a zoologist. And starting in the 1930s, as a child and as an adult, he was wondering, what in the heck are these butterflies? Where are they going? Uh-huh. And he got so intrigued, and him and his wife started, trying all manner of things to put paper tags on the butterflies and see if somebody further out might find it. After a lot of work over 2 decades or something like that, they figured out the best tag to put on them. Like Monarch Watch does the tagging, by the way, now.
So people actually tag a little butterfly and track them all. Wow.
You got it. And if people your listeners want to become involved in it, go on to monarchwatch.org, and you can become a member of that citizen science, as I like to call it. Right. So Nora and Fred Urquhart started putting ads in the paper saying, we're releasing these butterflies, and go to, they put it in, all over. And lucky for them, this one guy named Ken Brugger, and he's American, a Texan, and his bride, who is from Michoacan, Catalina Aguado, they happened to see this. And indeed, he was driving. It was really rainy, bad rain and all that in the month of October, November, and butterflies started raining on his windshield, and he's trying to dislodge these butterflies with the windshield wiper, imagine that, and he's wondering, so he pulls over, sees these literally tens of thousands of butterflies dropping because they're getting wet and heavy, they can't fly, in Michoacan. Okay? And then he remembers reading that the newspaper article that Nora had put out. This is in 1973-74, and then he calls Fred and Nora Urquhart. This is Ken Brugger, calls them, says, I think we found it, these butterflies. And then the cool part of the story is Nora and Fred fly to Mexico and actually trek in this place called Sierra Cinque and find the butterflies. And the best part is this. Fred is sitting on a rock, and there's thousands of butterflies on the ground, and he's kind of stirring them with a stick.
Uh-huh.
Suddenly he comes across a butterfly with a tag on it, number 375. That was released by 2 students and a teacher in Minnesota, one Mr. Gilbert. And from Minnesota, those butterflies, but that butterfly had gone all the way down to Michoacan. And now, like they say, the rest is history.
Well, now you say that, but what's the average life cycle of a butterfly? I thought the average butterfly life cycle was like 2 weeks to a month or so. Is that right? Or am I way off there?
Well, so
because that would mean that it flew from Minnesota down to central Mexico in a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks.
They can fly. Some of these butterflies can travel about 80 miles a day.
Okay.
And so 80 miles a day, it's 800 miles in 10 days, 1,600 miles in 20 days, etc. Right?
Yeah.
So in the summertime, these butterflies, the adult female and male, can live about 30 days or so. Okay. And they can make that trek. The ones in the wintertime, they live to 6 to 8 months.
Okay.
They live quite a long time.
Okay.
And so they can indeed make the trek. And many of them die. How many times have you not driven on Interstate 70 and hit a butterfly on your windshield? I have.
Yeah, and you feel bad about it.
Yeah, you feel bad. Me too.
God,
Me too.
no.
I feel really bad. That's my favorite insect, Yeah. But you do. What are you going to do? There's nothing. And a couple of times I've even tried to swerve, on the interstate.
For a butterfly, I know.
It's pretty dumb of me to be doing that. And I'd say to your listeners, please do not do that. If a butterfly dies, that's okay. In the big scheme of things, one dying is okay. But the one dying in the many, many ones dying is a pretty significant number. But the point of the matter is that it is an amazing miracle that these butterflies are going back and forth like this. And it's pretty cool. And so the habitat destruction, all of this, this whole suite of things that are going on that we can think of is part of this conversation, right? And really at the end of the day, for your listeners, for me, for you, for all of us, this poster child, what can we do to protect it, take care of it, take care of its habitat, take care of its hosts?
Mm-hmm.
And really a critically important part of it. And again, as I said, it's a poster child. One species in the big scheme of things doesn't matter. But really, it is an indicator species that tells us, hey, there's other things that are going on that we got to be mindful of.
Now, the story you just shared about the them tracking butterflies down to Mexico, what year was that? Do you know about what year?
Yeah, sure. It was 1973, 74,
so we're only
75.
We're only roughly 40-some, 50 years into really seeing how this works.
And Fred wrote this wonderful article in the National Geographic.
Mm-hmm.
It comes out in 1976 in the August issue. So Google Fred Urquhart, 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 but it's pronounced Urquhart, and Urquhart, Fred, and put National Geographic, and it should pull up the article. It's got Catalina's picture on the cover, and there she is. There's Catalina. And it's a really fantastic article to read, by the way. I'd encourage your listeners to read that article. And it's a pretty cool story about the whole thing, how it came about. And Fred had been doing this since 1936. And 40 years later, 4 decades later,
finally
found it.
Found it last.
Yeah, right. Found it last is the title of the article itself. And Fred passed away in 2002.
Mm-hmm.
And then Nora passed away in 2009.
Wow.
Yeah.
The monarch butterfly, is it exclusive to North America, or can you find them around the world as well?
Okay. So occasionally what happens when you get these nor'easters, the nor'easter is that storm pattern that you get along the Atlantic seaboard.
Okay, yeah.
That goes around up into Maine and on. Occasionally, when you have nor'easters, some of these migrating butterflies, they get caught in it, and they get blown into England. So they have been found in Malta and England and other places as well.
Wow.
But they can't survive there.
Okay.
Right? You know, they're the occasional butterflies. It's a one-way trip, you know. And that's one. Now, interestingly, so there's a second population of monarch butterflies west of the Mississippi in California. And so, you know, like the swallows of Capistrano, you've got these monarch butterflies as well in along the coast of California, north central area. And they fly in and fly back up to Canada, back and forth, like the eastern population does. And these things got separated out probably many thousands of years ago. And they're two separate populations that you've got in the United States, separated by the Rocky Mountains.
Yeah, that map we just showed a few minutes ago showed there's a whole different group of them that come from California.
You got it. And they exhibit a similar sort of a pattern like the eastern ones do. The third thing is that in Australia, they have a monarch butterfly, and it exhibits a very similar sort of biology and behavior as well. And, you know, these things are fascinating insects, you know, as you said earlier, for children and for adults as well. You know, it really is the poster child of a butterfly for all of us. And there's been a whole bunch of people that have dedicated their lives to understanding what these things do. You know, Lincoln Brower is one of the well-known guys. He's in Virginia now. He's been around for a long time. He's worked on monarch butterflies for I think like 60 years or something like that.
Okay.
And he's one of the ones that came up with the knowledge that we have about the poisonous nature of these things and the mimicry and things like that too. And my agency provides a lot of funding for this work to be done on monarch butterflies as well as other pollinators as well. And so there's a bunch of people, new people that have come along, young people that are really bringing very creative, you know, today's modern biology tools that we've got. And like, you know, satellite detection systems and being able to look at, so we can look at the ratio between carbon and hydrogen. And in carbon and hydrogen, there are what we refer to as different isotopes, different types. Okay? If you're from Illinois, the ratio of that carbon to hydrogen is of a certain type, as opposed to if you're from Minnesota, as opposed to if you're from Canada. And using that, you can track where these butterflies are coming from, for example. It's pretty cool sort of techniques that have been developed that allow us to do these things. And also our ability to, you know, track them. You can put like a little bitty, really tiny, rather than having a little paper tag on it, you can actually put a tiny little transmitter device on it. We gave money to, and now this work is being done on bees by this professor at Oregon State University. And she can put these little gizmos on those bees, and then she can track where they're going.
So they're that small and lightweight that it doesn't affect.
So small. So you know, the microprocessor industry, the internet, these disruptive technologies that we've got have really contributed to our ability to do things. So now, for example,
it's not just to email.
That's right.
You know, it's not just a Facebook or email. Like you're tracking bees or butterflies on
individually.
Individually. Yes.
It's
incredible.
And you know, with Twitter and things like that now. In fact, if you go to that Journey North website, there's a map there, and I belong to it. And you know, when I saw a butterfly flying outside my office window in Washington D.C., fourth floor office window here about 3 weeks ago, I went in and
here under reporting.
Under reporting. Sorry, there's a map there that should pull up in just a second. We hope. Maybe all sightings. Click on all sightings up on top.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All adults in the last 14 days.
Yeah, display. Oh, maybe it's going to give you a spreadsheet. No. There's a map there. I'll let your readers go, listeners go there and see that. And on the map, you can actually see, you know, dots where people have put in their data like this.
Wow.
And in real time, you can see what's going on. These butterflies are moving, right? Imagine with these little devices that self-report as to where I am right now. This is like your GPS on your car or in your iPhone, right? In my iPhone, there's a GPS. You can, with the right tool, for example, parents can put an app on their children's phone and track where their children are because of GPS. And imagine what we could do with birds and monarch butterflies and bees to see where they're at any given time. And these technologies that are coming along are pretty fantastic. That'll allow us to get better at looking at these populations and come up with, if things are happening that are destroying the habitat or whatever, we can come up with better ways of actually dealing with it.
Man, you know, about 2 weeks ago, I had Angela Speck on the show, and she is an astrophysicist at University of Missouri in Columbia. You know, super all about everything space and astronomy related. And she was national co-chair of preparing the whole country for the eclipse that happened. And we were talking about all sorts of science stuff. We were talking about one of the newest satellites going up. It's going to be so much more powerful than the Hubble. It will be able to see like twice as far into past, if you will. Yep. And we had the same exact thing I'm about to say here, right? I say at some points in 2017, your mind just kind of like blows. Like, how cool is science? Like, how cool is this? That we've developed.
Exactly.
Like, you know, like my grandfather, my grandfather died a few years back, and I was able to show him in 1080p HD the satellite that dropped down onto Mars. And it showed the satellite because they had a camera attached. And here he is at the age of like 84, 85, grew up during the Great Depression. Where was science? You know, it's at that point, where was science?
Amazing.
And now it's like, and now here you can track every single butterfly. Science is incredible where it's advancing. What are some other projects aside from just tracking the butterflies in that nature that modern science is helping researchers to find out more about?
Sure. I mean, for example, in the world of from a biological perspective, and all the genomics and genetics and things like that, we can today, thanks to the Human Genome Project and other things that have happened, the technology has evolved so rapidly, and the price has dropped so rapidly that we can take literally thousands of these butterflies and start identifying the genetic makeup of each one individually. And we can do what's referred to as population genomics.
Okay.
And you can look at population structure and things like that. And really, you can look at the evolution of these things, what's going to happen, are they being impacted by various external events and things like that. And so there's a lot of work that is possible as a result of the revolution in biology. There's a revolution in information technology. Of course, we know about that. There's been a concurrent revolution in biology that's been going on. And then there's a revolution in nanotechnology, for example. Imagine you can take, nanotechnology, for your listeners, imagine something that you can't even see with your naked eye, right? It's a billionth of a millimeter. That's the size of whatever it is that you're looking at.
Right.
And so that little thing, tiny thing, we talk about how, for diagnostics in humans, for cancer and things like that, we can put a little submarine-like nano gizmo into our bloodstream and go around checking to see if everything is okay and report back and all that. Imagine we can do that with a monarch butterfly. As it's flying, we can get real-time information on the body temperature, on its physiological makeup, on its development of its eggs, and its status. Is it hungry? Is it looking for food? All of these things are, like tantalizingly close to be able to do that.
So these are projects that are underway that are
these are possibilities, and there are projects like that that are coming along, and people are, again, I get, I have the privilege of being getting a bird's eye view of all the amazing projects, not just with butterflies, but, producing food, about using drones. Imagine, you got a horde of butterflies flying, and we can fly a drone along with that, keeping track with it. And that drone is sending us imagery back to wherever you are, sitting with a computer or something like that, looking at these things. So the technologies that are coming along are being adapted and adopted very, very rapidly. And the funding that we provide, my agency and the National Science Foundation and others provide, are really about helping scientists help us understand these phenomena, these biological phenomena, and this convergence that's taking place of cognitive science and nanoscience and bioscience and information science and all this convergence, as we call it, is I call it convergence to singularity, and really, to transcend biological limits and understanding how these things happen is pretty amazing.
It's definitely mind-blowing.
It is, and to be a part of it, to sit and have that bird's eye view in the position that I have is pretty cool.
So then, are you familiar with CRISPR? The gene project CRISPR. So then, what you are saying? Are you kind of somewhat insinuating that it's possible in the future you could edit the genes of butterflies to make them more efficient or more colorful or more immune to certain pesticides, herbicides, make them stronger that they can last longer? Or is that an idea? Is that a concept that people are potentially talking about?
Absolutely.
Okay.
All of that is possible.
And how would that even play out? What are some benefits of how that would play out?
Yeah, for example, let's say that you discovered that the monarch butterflies are particularly susceptible to a virus, just like you and I.
And let's pause for a moment. For people who don't know what CRISPR is, CRISPR is, and kind of correct me where I'm wrong here, but CRISPR is it stands for it's a long term, but basically what they're saying is that science is to the point where we can identify the genes in people's DNA, and if I am susceptible to, say, brain cancer, they can go in and edit that gene to remove that faulty part of my DNA. Or if you're if you're pregnant and the doctors say it looks like your child may be susceptible to cancer or whatever, they can change it. And then the next step is, designer babies. Well, I want my child to be 6'4". I want it to be very, muscular and full head of hair, all that stuff. So that's kind of where CRISPR is coming, is that we can identify within DNA what's going to happen. So now that's where I bring up is that same.
Yeah, so CRISPR-Cas9, as we call it, is from bacteria. And there's a number of scientists that figure this out. Jennifer Doudna at the University of California, Berkeley, and her colleague from France, and Frank Church from Harvard. And there's a whole bunch of people that have done this.
Okay.
And along with CRISPR-Cas9, CRISPR/CAS9, and people can, there's some really fantastic on YouTube. Jennifer Doudna has done wonderful videos that you can see to understand what these things are all about. Okay, you can do that. Along with that, we've got other gene editing. These are called gene editing techniques. Okay, you can precisely go in. So people know, your listeners know, DNA, genes, right, are made up of typically 4 adenine, guanine, etc., AGCT, right?
AGCT, right.
Yeah. And you can go in, so 3 of those constitute a particular amino acid, triplets. You got a whole bunch of triplets. And you can go in, precisely edit that. Instead of AGC, you can make it TCA or something like that. Okay? So that's the technique. And there's several techniques that have been developed. There's one called TALENs, another one called zinc finger nucleases and all that. And so we can use these things. For example, we provided funding to a scientist at the University of Maryland, College Park, who is basically going in and editing the gene that makes pigs susceptible to swine flu.
Okay.
So those pigs that are born after that will exhibit that particular characteristic, we call it a trait, where they're not susceptible to swine flu. Imagine if you can stop it right there. Swine flu will not evolve to come and hit humans as well. Swine flu is pretty serious, okay? There are many diseases like this. For example, in cattle and pigs, for example, another pig disease called porcine epidemic diarrhea virus, PEDV, that killed 8 million piglets in America here a couple of years ago. That's a devastating situation. Avian influenza, 2 years ago, we had to destroy 50 million birds in the upper Midwest, in Minnesota and Iowa and places like that. Imagine if you could take those birds and tweak the gene and eliminate the susceptibility to the avian influenza. Okay, pretty amazing. And we're doing these things in plants, for example, to make them more efficient at taking up nitrogen, to use water better, and to photosynthesize better. All of these things are happening right now. My agency, has provided funding in the last few years to about 75 different projects of this nature. Coming back to the butterfly question, imagine that they're susceptible to a virus, just like the avian influenza in birds or the swine flu in pigs, or in you and I. Just yesterday, I'm sure some of your listeners heard that a child underwent gene therapy, where they took his T cells. These are the cells that destroy invading viruses and bacteria and all that. And they took it out of him, modified it so it contains receptors that can detect the leukemia in that child, this particularly devastating leukemia. And he'd already gone through multiple treatments and all that. It's pretty close to death. And was able to knock out the leukemia. He's now completely cancer-free, that young man. He's now 19 years old.
That was yesterday in the news.
It came out in the news yesterday.
I did not know
it's pretty
that.
cool.
Wow.
It was on the news again this morning as well. It came out last night.
Okay.
So in any case, imagine those are the possibilities, right? And so in the butterflies as well, potentially we could do that. Potentially we could make them so they can withstand the very high temperatures, the very low sub-freezing temperatures and things like that. These are all certainly part of the realm of possibilities. But then you have to think also, well, what's the downside to all this?
Yeah, for every action, there's a reaction. What's the
unintended
consequences
and things like that. And do we really want to go through this and say that, okay, forever and ever and ever, we want to protect these butterflies or whatever? I mean, these are questions that society has to deal with as well.
Sure.
Again, we have a program called Biotechnology Risk Assessment Program. In it, we provide funding, by the way, for the sociological implications, the biotechnological implications, and things of that nature as well. So certainly the new biology that we've got offer us some pretty tantalizing possibilities. And, you can, for example, come in and incorporate, as you said, traits in humans that are taller, more beautiful, resist all diseases, and the most brilliant, in terms of intellectual capacity and all that. We have to decide, is that something that we want? And maybe it's a conversation for another time.
Yeah, that's a long one, too.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's going to be a long one, too.
Okay, so with butterflies, here's you see occasionally every few months, a couple of years, you find, like, for example, in a jellyfish species not so long ago, they found an incredibly rare chemical makeup compound that has some benefit with health to humans, helping to heal whatever sickness. Have they found anything within butterflies? And this is such a maybe strange question, but whatever. Within butterflies that they've been able to extract, or are there any researches going on what butterflies have that can contribute to humankind as well? Anything like that?
Sure. There is, obviously. I mean, you see a smile on my face as you're asking me that question. Indeed, not just butterflies and insects in general. There's some amazing compounds that they produce. I mean, like all the antibiotics that we have, most of them, they come from bacteria or fungi. Okay? These are natural products. Aspirin that we consume for headaches comes from willows. So plants, bacteria, insects, other animals, many of the animals that live in deep oceans, etc., they produce various chemistries, okay?
Right.
And to tap into that chemistry and pull things out, there's some pretty interesting possibilities. In the venom of honeybees, for example, there's some compounds that are, potent. For example, back in the good old days, you're talking about your grandfather, and people that went to war in the Second World War or maybe in the First World War, they might end up getting infections, gangrene and things like that.
Right.
And for a gangrene, you would release these maggots, the larvae of flies, of particular fly, that would go in and eat up all the dead tissue of the gangrene. And in the saliva, it produces these compounds that kills any other secondary bacterial infections and things like that.
Wow.
Okay.
I had no idea. I hadn't heard that.
That's pretty amazing, right? And then many of the flies and other species, but flies. There's a guy at Kansas State University, Mike Knost, who's done some pretty cool work on this at K-State, and they produce these compounds called diptericins. Diptera are the flies, the family of flies, and diptericin is a compound that's produced that's a potent antibacterial compound. We talk about antimicrobial resistance and things like that because we're overusing antibiotics, and we got to come up with a better way of doing it. So you're trying to find alternative sorts of approaches to dealing with it as well. So imagine the antibacterial compounds that we use are coming from bacteria. What if you take antibacterial compounds from insects that are totally unrelated? They will have a different mode of action. And so those are some of the things that are going on. So again, in butterflies as well, there's a number of very interesting compounds that are present. So the National Cancer Institute, for example, which is part of the National Institutes of Health, has tens of thousands of these library of compounds and things like that they're taking. And if you go to shamans in Africa or witch doctors, etc., in South America and Asia and other places, they use these remedies that are, allegedly going to be good for you for whatever ailment, cancer or diabetes or things like that. And so they give you like a suite of, plant-based, insect-based, etc., compounds to consume. And so there's a lot of research that's going on now to apply modern biological and scientific approaches to understand how that shaman's treatment for malaria, how did it work? Why did it work? Can you understand what that is, right? Because now we can come up with new chemistries, new compounds that might treat cancer, treat leukemia. The periwinkle flower that people have in their little beds in their yards, right? That periwinkle flower has a compound called vinblastine, which is one of the original compounds that was used as an anti-cancer drug, for example. So that's the possibility that you've got as well.
And like we said earlier, we're only maybe 50-ish years so into truly studying, for instance, the monarch butterfly. Who knows what could come up in the next 10, 20 years of studying and getting in deep, especially like we said, and we've been going on technology.
Right. And so the public needs to understand that these sorts of discoveries and inventions will not happen if the public does not invest in these endeavors. And, people think, somehow, someplace, food shows up, and it's so inexpensive in America, right? But without the research and translation of the knowledge and delivery, we call that extension. That's undertaken at the University of Missouri and Columbia, Kansas State University, or Purdue University, or other, MIT or Harvard or other places as well. Without the public investment, you're not going to get those sorts of inventions and discoveries. That's in the public domain. Okay, I pulled out my iPhone earlier, right?
Right.
The technology, it's not Apple's. Apple just pulled it all together. A lot of the technology in here, like the touch screen and things like that, is funding that the National Science Foundation provided. Public funding. Yeah. Right? And the handwriting recognition and, all of these things. The food that we consume. Our ability to, the drones that we use. The nanotechnology. CRISPR-Cas9 that we talked about. All of this courtesy of the public, that your listeners have a stake in this matter. And so really, your listeners, you and all of us need to be concerned that if we do not invest, we're not going to make the progress.
Absolutely. And, a lot of people argue about, my taxes and this and that. And there's an argument for where they're going and waste and all of that. But, there's very little argument against, like what you're saying. There's so much benefit from when those tax dollars are going into something useful like science research.
Right. Or biomedical research. Or
any type of science research.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally.
Okay. We've been going at this for about an hour, so let me ask a couple more questions. We'll wrap this up. As you were pulling up here, you said you guys are moving your office to Kansas City.
No.
Or maybe I misunderstood. So what was?
No, we're not moving my office to Kansas City. And my wife and I are moving.
Just your wife and you are moving. Oh, okay. I was going to say, why are they moving the office to Kansas City from D.C.? Okay, that makes sense then.
That's right.
Okay, here's a couple questions I like to ask folks. If high school graduates in Missouri, if you were able to give them all a book or two as they're graduating this spring, is there any one book or so you might give them? Or it could be two or three if you can't think of just one.
Oh, wow. In regards to the topic that we discussed, about
anything at all
about the butterflies,
it could be. This is just you, Sonny.
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, again, from the topic of the butterflies for the student, the high school student, I'd encourage him or her to read Fred Urquhart's article that I referred to
the Nat Geo
in the National Geographic back in 1976. It's a fascinating story.
Okay.
There's also some stories that have been written about Catalina as well. The Ken and Catalina Brugger that I was referring to. That's certainly something that they could read about as well. And along with that, I mean, if they want to read books, I'd say some of the books that I've read that I've had pretty significant impact on me is, for example, Mahatma Gandhi's book, My Experiments with Truth, is an excellent book to read. And it gives you a sense of what Gandhi did, and most of your listeners probably have heard of him.
Sure.
And so that's something that I read. A book that is that my daughter and wife and I really enjoyed, because we're driving to New York City as we're dropping our daughter off to go to New York University. We heard on the radio on the books on tape. It's called Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver. That's an excellent book. It's about this missionary family in Africa back in the 1950s and 1960s. That has been an excellent book as well. If you want to read a really big book on the origin of species by Charles Darwin, would be something.
I'll admit, I tried to read through it, and that is so dense. You need to keep Wikipedia next to you as you go through some of those chapters because of how, you think of how long ago he wrote that. Yeah.
I'm an avid reader, and I could go on and on and on
Sure.
about a whole bunch of books. And I always tell people, that read. It doesn't matter what you read.
Just do it.
Yeah, even if it's like a magazine or a newspaper or whatever, And just the fact that you're developing that habit of reading is really, it makes you a lifelong learner as well. Okay.
Okay. How about any YouTube channels or podcasts that you really like, if any?
Wow, man, that's an interesting. So the YouTube channels and podcasts and things like that. I have pretty broad interests. I'm not just a scientist, not just a person that works in the field of food and agriculture as an entomologist, etc. A very broad interest, and there are a bunch of podcasts in the world of science and technology, and on YouTube as well, and that I tune into. But off the top of my head, I can't think of any specific ones. But again, my interests and my tastes are pretty eclectic, very eclectic. I read and listen and things like that, and I more than likely I end up reading, because there's a connection that your brain is making when you're reading. That's a different sort of neurologically, cognitively, a different connection than listening to a podcast. Nothing against you, Ryan. You do this for a living.
No problem.
But the reading part of it is really, really important. Reading and also writing is really important. You're making those connections, between the brain and the hand and the eye and things like that, cognitively. Whether you're an older person and well on your way to sort of the gerontological situation of dementia and all that, or you're a young person growing up.
Yeah, and that's not even an opinion. There's plenty of studies that show whether you're a child or whether you're an older folk, reading is definitely super beneficial to keep your stuff either developing or to preserve. Okay, last question, just for fun. If the USDA gave you a blank check to do any type of butterfly project you wanted to, it would be on time, on budget, and it would work out perfectly, whether it's science research or habitat restoration or anything, is there any just like pipe dream, pie in the sky project you think would be incredible to try to pull off?
Sure. Probably the one big question that would take a lot of money is to understand how it is that these butterflies go back to the same spot multiple generations removed when they go back to Mexico, to Michoacan. That is an unknown. We have no clue how they determine it's those Oyamel fir trees in that part in Sierra Chincua and El Rosario in this middle of this Mexican highlands. How in the heck do they do it? How in the heck do they do it? That's a burning question I wish we could have the wherewithal to understand.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. Well, hey, Sonny, that was awesome. I feel I'm so happy you came. I feel so much smarter for this last hour, and it was great. Everybody can follow. I know that is it the USDA or is it the has a Twitter that you can
NIFA, my own agency, has a Twitter.
Okay.
It's at USDA_NIFA.
Okay.
Yeah, that's our Twitter handle, and so that's what we end up using.
Okay, so if you guys want to follow and check that out, you can see it right there.
And
Otherwise,
I think Selena has been probably tweeting here too, or had
may have.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's it. We're going to end this right now. Thank you so much, and everybody, thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks so much. Okay, well, I hope.